Going. So good morning. Welcome to our Skills for California Power Hour, transforming the workforce development system to better serve justice-involved individuals. I'm Zima Creason. I'm the Executive Director of the California EDGE Coalition. Skills for California is a partnership led by the California EDGE Coalition and the National Skills Coalition. Skills for California is a statewide network of organizations advancing workforce development policies that remove systematic barriers and promote an inclusive economy for all Californians. Please note that this session is being recorded and we will share the recording after the event. We won't be answering live questions today, but please email info@caedge.org and I'll add this information to the chat with any questions that remain after the event, and a team member will route your question to the appropriate panelist for response. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Ana Alvarado, EDGE's Policy Director and the moderator for today's session. Take it away, Ana.
Thanks, Zima. Good morning, everyone. And again, thanks so much to our panelists today for joining us and providing your expertise on how to better serve justice-involved individuals in our workforce systems. To kick things off, let's go around the room here, and I'll go as I see the boxes on my Zoom screen. Please tell us a bit about yourself and your organization, and let's start off with Rebecca.
Good morning. My name is Rebecca Silbert. I'm the director of the Rising Scholars Network with the California Community Colleges. So that's it encompasses the colleges that serve students who are inside CDCR, that's the state prison system, or inside jails or juvenile halls, but also reentry programs on campus. Some folks may have heard of Project Rebound, which is in the CSU system, or Underground Scholars in the UC system. Rising Scholars is the parallel in the California Community College system. But because this system is much bigger than those other ones, we have a lot more programs and students. We have about 20,000 students inside CDCR on degree pathways, and we have Rising Scholars programs at about 60, I think it's 62 or 63 of the community colleges throughout the state, supporting students, usually with peer networks and educational support and some career connections, formerly incarcerated in whatever form, and whenever they come to us, we take them.
So thank you, Rebecca. Next up, we have Ken.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for having me. My name is Ken Oliver. I'm the executive director of the CROP organization. We're a workforce development reentry organization that focuses on reskilling justice-involved people, specifically in the tech sector.
Thanks, Ken. Next up, Sean.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sean Hughes. I'm the policy director for the California Opportunity Youth Network. We're a statewide network that does policy and practice. Our members provide opportunity youth programming, and we are focused on establishing career pathways for youth and young adults.
Thanks, Sean. And last but not least, Sam Lewis.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining. My name is Sam Lewis. I'm the executive director of ARC, the Anti-Recidivism Coalition, and we do work in 4 different areas in criminal justice reform. Our mission is to end mass incarceration in California, and how we do that is through policy. We've now passed 33 pieces of legislation that have incrementally made our criminal justice system more fair. We're not quite where we need to be at yet, but we're getting there. We also do robust reentry, including careers, career pathways, multiple career pathways, transitional housing, and other wraparound supportive services. We also provide preventative methods for juveniles that have been involved with the juvenile system before they actually matriculate into the adult system. And we do re-entry work inside the juvenile halls, the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitations in California, and all of the DJJ facilities, which I'm happy to announce will be closing in 2023.
Awesome. Thank you, Sam. Well, let's just jump right into some of these questions that we have for our panelists. And the first question that I have up here is, what are the top barriers justice-involved individuals face when trying to access job training, education programs, support services, and ultimately good jobs?
I'll take a stab at that first. I think the short answer is second-class citizenry, and the way that the system puts people back into the community, and then the community services that are out there typically relegate people who are justice involved or who have a criminal conviction as second-class citizens. These things bear out in the law. In California alone, there's 4,800 different laws on the books that prevent people who've been incarcerated from accessing housing, accessing employment, accessing other different types of services, and specifically licensing, career licensing and workforce licensing that allowed them to get back into the workforce in a meaningful place. In addition to that, there aren't a tremendous amount of entry points for high-level, high-skill training programs, especially outside of the labor sector, where people can access the knowledge-based and technology-based economy. So that's a big barrier. And then really employer education, having employers understand what the Fair Chance Act in California was about and the necessity to have as ground zero in their inclusion policy, fair chance candidates and the talent pool that justice involved people represent in California, with more than 36,000 entering back into the community a year. Those are just some of the barriers.
And so I'll jump into one of the policy barriers that we see, and COIN focuses on youth and young adults. So that's the lens I'm going to take here. But the largest funder of workforce development services for youth and young adults is the federal WIOA program, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. And one of the barriers we see for justice-involved youth and young adults there is that the law requires that at minimum 75% of the resources that flow through the local workforce boards be set aside for out-of-school youth. But what we've done is a lot of reform in the justice system to make sure that while youth are being served in the justice system, they're persisting in education. And so we have the money on the out-of-school youth side, and yet the youth on the in-school youth side. And so the reality is that these young people become a lower priority for workforce development services while they're being served in the justice system, which does them no good. And which, if you look at the data about their economic self-sufficiency in early adulthood and the rates of recidivism, means we need to do a better job of connecting them while they're in school and while they're connected to the justice system. If you look at the statewide data in California, there are about 17,000 youth and young adults that are served through WIOA funded programs and services each year in the state. And only 1,200 of those young people are justice involved youth. So that's about 7%, which is extremely low considering they're recognized as a priority under law. So that's one of the big structural and policy barriers that we see and that we're working to navigate.
Just want to add on to great answers, Sean and Ken. Some real basic things that could be addressed prior to release from incarceration is basic computer skills, which definitely hinder a person and being able to get into some careers. And the availability of programs, and Ken mentioned it, the availability of these reentry programs throughout the state of California. So I think more broadly, I would say lack of investment in people that are incarcerated and people that are being released from incarceration.
Awesome. Definitely all great points, and also want to highlight that a lot of one-time investments were made in the budget, but obviously we need sustainability in California and ongoing funding. Next question, what strategies or programming do you think should be put into place to ensure that justice-involved individuals thrive?
I'll take a stab at that one, as Ken said. I think, in my opinion, I think we need to look at both rehabilitation and reentry as part of our current correction system in all correction settings, whether it be the county jail, state prison, DJJ facilities, or juvenile halls. All skills, including vocations, education, robust post-secondary education, should be made available in those settings in every single institution. It's an investment in human beings that will be coming home that need an opportunity to be able to return. The second part, I think strategically, we need to also be able to address many of the traumas that people have experienced prior to and while incarcerated. So therapy should be made ready available in all of these settings once again. And then I'll lastly close with, when I talk about robust reentry services, housing and career pathways should already be planned out prior to release from incarceration. If we do the work on the inside, make sure that people that are currently incarcerated are prepared to come home. The transition from incarceration to free society can be seamless and hugely successful and reduce our recidivism rate greatly.
Thanks, Anna. So, we're speaking from the perspective of I'm speaking from the perspective of the colleges, but I think that the lessons learned here apply in the transition to employment and quite frankly, with successful reentry across the board. And the main thing I would say that I think Ken touched on is that we need some systematic record clearance. That California right now places the burden on the individual. It is an onerous burden. It is difficult to meet. It costs money if the person, there are some low cost or free legal services, but if you live somewhere that doesn't have those, and I would go so far as to say that, shame on us for thinking that someone can do their time and that can follow them for the rest of their lives. Like, everybody needs to stop and realize that that is just flat out not okay, that we need to have a fundamental system based on principles of forgiveness and moving forward rather than punishment for the rest of your life. And that begins with record clearance that is automatic and puts the burden on the DA or someone to come back and prove why it would not be appropriate, as opposed to the burden being on the individual to prove why it is appropriate. That's obviously has nothing in particular to do with the community colleges, because we take everyone, we don't ask the question, we support all of our students, but we see it time and again as the students leave the colleges and try to enter the workforce. So that would be the first thing I would say if we want to think more broadly from a state about how to help people thrive. From the perspective of our individual programs and thriving in the colleges, I would say two things. One is that we really emphasize being student-centered. In our case, we're talking about students. So, in the workforce, it's employee-centered. But I think folks that want to do right and want to help and want to be involved still sometimes forget to ask the folks who have the direct experience. And that it is often not intentional, but remembering and reminding to ask, and again, in our case, the students, what do you need? What can we do? How can we help? And to repeat the question time and again will help both with success in education with us, but also in employment. And then the second piece would be colleges. We focus on making sure that they are hiring directly impacted folks as the staff person to support the student. And I think that implies, I think it was Ken said something about, employers leading the way, that employers who do the hiring need to make clear that they're doing the hiring and have folks out there to do outreach and mentor and access all of the untapped talent that exists. And that is best done by publicly hiring folks with direct involvement in the criminal justice system and letting them lead the way.
If I could just chime in, I just want to build upon the brilliant things that Sam and Rebecca said, and I appreciate both of your comments. I think that as we think through some of these problems, it's important not to think of these things in silos. Two of the most important things are thinking about things holistically and having them be human-centered. So when we talk about these different sectors, sometimes we get so focused on our specific sector, we forget to think about the human-centeredness of the solutions that we're creating and the people that we're actually serving. And so with justice-involved people, especially people who've served long periods of time in prison, it's almost impossible to talk about housing without talking about workforce development. It's almost impossible to talk about workforce development without talking about housing and some of the wraparound services. I mean, ARC does a great job at combining housing and workforce development. Organizations up north are doing the same thing. But it's just integral that we think about those things wholly and not just think about, like, when we think about education and people getting to college, like, people need a place to live. They need stipends to be able to survive in order to reset and regroup before they fully reintegrate back into the community. Thank you.
Any other thoughts, comments before moving on to the next question? And very important points that the panelists so far have raised on those support services that are so critical to get in these programs, moving folks ahead. Next question is, please share how you are supporting justice-involved individuals with gaining access to high-quality training that leads to good jobs.
I can start off on this one. And I, although I work for the California community colleges, I always try to start by saying, look, the important thing is to have multiple pathways to achieve the outcomes that we need and want as a state, right? So the community colleges are not for everyone. Some people find a job other ways. Some people don't need it. They're not ready. Some people want it. But for folks who are ready, we focus on that job training, and all of the community colleges, I think most people know, are mandated by the state to have connections to the local and regional job market. So we have some colleges that have the Rising Scholars programs. Some of those are really focused on the transfer side, and others do both, and some are very focused on the career side. But to make that connection with employers, to be the bridge, right? To be the bridge between the student who wants the job, to vouch for that, to vouch for the student, to make the connection, to walk them over there, to say, you know, this is a safe place to be hired. This is a place where you can have a good job. These are the skills you need. I think that the colleges do that decently well, and where we have programs to support the students, it works well. Where I see and there's one other thing which is actually new for the state of California, but which is called credit for prior learning. It was just pre-COVID was the whole legislative push on it. And the idea there is to take all the folks who are coming out of CDCR, that's the state prison system. So there's a lot of career training that CDCR provides people, right? It's a lot in the building trades, electrical, plumbing, construction. It's non-accredited, but it is industry certified. And some folks can come out with that and go right into employment, especially if it's in the trades and there's a decent wage. Other folks get a little bit lost. So we don't have those bridges, those connections between the coming out with those skills and either the employment or the college, whatever people want. We lose people right there. One thing that does help is the new law that allows what's called credit for prior learning in the college system, which says if you have the same content, but you learned it in a non-college, non-accredited context, you can show up at the college and say, you know, I already took these 6 welding classes, and you can then be at the college and be almost on your way to getting the certificate of degree. So you get that credit coming in. So credit for prior learning will be huge. It's still just rolling out, but it is certainly one thing that will make that gap. But we do need to have more connections on all the drop points, right? From inside to outside, from community to employment, from at all the places. And I know that the other folks on this call are doing that. It's in some ways, we can never do too much in that space.
Would love to share. Thank you, Rebecca. Great insight. Would love to share a couple of things in terms of how policy also overlaps and how to support or set people up to be able to get into training and gaining access. So we've done a couple of things at ARC. One, 4 years ago, we started with our pre-apprenticeship Second Chance Boot Camp, which is a pathway into the building trades in LA and Orange County, and in some instances, the Bay Area when they transfer employment. We've now put 230 people into those careers. We're on our 13th cohort. We pay people to actually go through this. So when a person comes home from incarceration, they can enroll in this program. They're paid $15 an hour. $15 an hour. We offer housing if necessary, and in our housing, we offer therapy, which is vitally necessary. As Ken said, when we talk about human-centered people that have been through a lot. And so after 13 weeks, they're in an apprenticeship. They're guaranteed at the completion of our program an opportunity to be in an apprenticeship program in the building trades. I interviewed people from our first cohort from 2016. Carpenters are making $46.21 who have journeyed out, and electricians are making $51.50 an hour who journeyed out. And that was our first cohort. Again, we're now on our 13th cohort. One of the things we also recognize is going into the building trades requires that you go through what they call the MC3 curriculum, which is the multi-craft core curriculum. We ran a bill in 2017, Senate Bill 866, to be able to bring the MC3 curriculum into all of the prisons in the state of California and into the DJJ facilities, while working in conjunction with the various building trades in different counties to be able to establish those pathways. In the last year and a half or so, we've had great gains in different counties, but not as much as we'd like to see. We just don't have the funding to be able to go to all 58 counties in California and be the spokesperson for all of these institutions, but it is coming along, and that is a pathway. The second path that we created was the first ever Firefighters program that allows people that are incarcerated in fire camps and firehouses that are actually assisting with firefighting while incarcerated to come home and actually become firefighters. We've now graduated 62 firefighters who are fighting fires across the state of California. We have 72 that are currently in training that were actually, that are cadets and were actually at the fire lines in San Luis Obispo a week or so ago. One of the things we instantly recognized was when a person comes out of incarceration, you have the barrier of not being able to obtain your EMT license. And so we ran a bill, AB 1247, 2 years ago. And this allows people who are coming out of those fire camps and out of the firehouses to have their record expunged, get their EMT license, and become a firefighter, whether it be county, city, or state, or Cal Wildland. And so this is an example of two different models that we use. In both instances, we use policy to be able to streamline overcoming barriers and to be able to bring people in. We also created pathways into the entertainment industry. Through a partnership with NBC Universal and an internship program, we've now placed formerly incarcerated people into careers, starting wages at $75,000 with Marvel, Warner Brothers, NBC Universal, and we're opening up a couple of other avenues to different places in the entertainment industry. We've also created pathways into places like production assistants, grips, lights, cameras, all of these things that pay a prevailing wage. And the way that we've been able to do this is, one, we support people as they come home and create this community of support, regardless of what their struggles are, we will support them. And two, creating the relationship with these different employers in different areas in order for them to actually stop for a moment and stop and reimagine what people can actually bring to the table, whether they've been incarcerated or not. In the coming months, we'll actually have a commercial coming out from NBC Universal that highlights all of the work that we've been doing with them, which is amazing. And then the last thing I'll say is when we first started this, we went to NBC Universal and they did not want to hire people that were formerly incarcerated because of records. And so we sat down with their CEO and their security and their background checks and literally worked it out where they understood these are people that need second chances. And we can prepare them. And since then, again, this is 4 years ago, NBC Universal has said, send us more, and have created other pathways to include places like Bad Robot, again, Marvel, Warner Brothers, and Paramount.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Sam. You are busy. You've got a lot going on and such great programs too that, need funding too, right? And that's where we're hoping that our friends at the state legislature are watching and listening to these amazing programs that are working. Anyone else, Ken or Sean, that wants to take a stab at this question?
Sure. Rebecca's doing great stuff in education. Sam laid out the wonderful things that ARC is doing. And one of our approaches that we thought about early on was really focusing on technology and how do we bridge the digital divide between Black and brown people, justice involved people in the tech sector who, have been part of the biggest wealth grab probably in any kind of history of the world. And so, what we focused on is really getting people skilled up when it comes to technology and being able to work with specifically companies like Google, companies like Microsoft, companies like Oracle, who are interested in job training programs and providing sector-based certifications, creating apprenticeship programs with those companies to actually bring people on the livable wage. I want to stress, this is a workforce panel, so I want to talk about the importance of livable wage in communities like the ones surrounding the Bay Area or the ones like Los Angeles County that put 75% of the people in prison in the prison system. And so, these transitional job models and these models that provide people high labor, low wage jobs really set people up for failure. And we think that some of the answers to that lie in three key areas. Sam talked about one of them, policy, which is very important. But talent development is key, being able to provide people with the skills necessary to compete with the workforce. And employer development. It's a key piece that's missing from this conversation is how do you work with employers and convince them and talk to them and work with HR and talent to onboard and create programs and pathways for justice involved people. We've partnered with Jobs for the Future, JFF, and Dave Skiller Bread Foundation to develop a national curriculum of these 8-week boot camps where we actually embed ourselves into companies for 2 months and show them how to create job training, job programs and career programs for justice involved people. So I think looking at those three approaches, talent development, employer development, and then undergirding those things with policy are what helped, my organization this year probably get the largest award ever given to formerly incarcerated people to develop a tech sector-based workforce development program that includes housing and full wraparound services that we talked about a little bit earlier. So I think all approaches are great. And I think that continuing along this path of thinking in a human-centered and holistic way about how we get people the things that they need to reintegrate into the economy and have the opportunity to thrive is important.
That's awesome. Yeah, and congrats on that budget allocation. We're excited to see what will come out of that work. Any other comments or thoughts? Alrighty, moving on to the next one. The next questions really encompassed what we covered in number 4. But if any other folks want to add more comments or suggestions on how we can really share some training and hiring strategies that lead to good jobs for this specific population.
I think want to share a couple of things. And this is, I've now been doing this work for 10 years. Come January 12th, it'll be 10 years that I've been home from being incarcerated for 24 years and 10 years that I've been immersed in this work. Working with both youth that are incarcerated and watching them come home. I actually have 3 that are here that are both in college and in internships with one community, the Rams and the Lakers. And I think a couple of things that we really need to look at when we're talking about people that have been incarcerated. Oftentimes, and I've seen this, we don't address some of the core issues. I can prepare you to get into some incredible fields, but if you have not addressed, and this is workforce development, but you still have to be healthy and whole for pressures, because the further you move up in a career, the more pressure there will be upon you. And when you have those pressures, even people that have not been incarcerated need a certain amount of mental health services, therapy, someone to be able to offload the burdens of everyday life. Because if you don't address these things, your traumas will manifest themselves. And I've seen it. I've seen it where I had one of my guys that was literally a superstar. His mom passed away. He got very sick. Then his daughter passed away and he spiraled. And when I finally got a chance to talk with him, he said, I didn't know how to handle these things. And I never even addressed what I had dealt with when I was a kid. And so therapy is one of the things that we require of our members, and we ask that they take part in, because success comes with a price of pressure. Being well paid does not mean that it's an easy job. And I can say that from this position, but also from people that are in all these other different avenues. And so Kim mentioned housing is definitely a place that creates pressure. You have to have a safe place to prepare and take off to go to work. But you also have to address your own barriers, because the one thing that we found in this work is we can have our personal barriers that we have not addressed, and they can manifest themselves. It can be drugs, alcohol. It can be if you have a stroke, you're not taking care of yourself, you're not eating right. All of these different things do manifest themselves over a period of time. And so if we address those things when a person is coming home, or even prior to coming home, through policies such as making sure that there's therapy available and training available while incarcerated, when a person comes home, they're more prepared to come into the workforce and really be superstars and live their best lives. And so I just want to highlight that one thing that I think is vitally important, to look at the whole person. Workforce development is incredibly important to the success of every individual, because to truly end mass incarceration, we have to attack poverty by breaking a cycle of these low-wage jobs that don't lead anywhere and you can't retire from. But in order to do that also, we have to look at the whole person.
I love that. Thank you, Sam. Just the way that you said the whole person just kind of stood out to me so much, especially when we're advocating at the Capitol, we need to really uplift that. Folks that are in the system, they have families, they are parents, they are mothers, fathers, their sisters, they're taking care of their elderly somehow. So definitely those support services are crucial.
I would add something actually that I will not take credit for, because I first heard it at a workforce conference in DC. This is probably back in 2018, and it was Johns Hopkins, which does a lot of hiring actually of formerly incarcerated folks, really pleading with other employers and especially large employers to stand up and be proud of it. And over the years of sort of policy work, and I know I've seen Sam in these fields and some of the rest of you, like I've always thought, like, if I really want CDCR to do something, I'm trying to find another warden to say, go for it. If you're looking for police chiefs to do something, you want another county with the police chief that says it's okay, because like it or not, like listens to like. And I think we don't have enough employers standing up and saying, yeah, that's what we're doing. It's fine. So it still feels like a niche thing or a special support or an on the side thing. And it really shouldn't be. It should be about, this is employment. This is the state of California. This is a workforce, and you're this is what we need to do. And it's fine. But it still kind of feels like something. And I know a fair number of employers who do hire, but they say, oh, well, they're going to do it on the side, or they're not willing to stand up for it. And I think overcoming that stigma, for lack of a better word, amongst employers, and especially large employers, like normal, regular employers, I think will go a huge way towards opening the floodgates across the state.
Such a great point. Thank you so much, Rebecca. All right, moving on to the next question. What are some emerging opportunities from recent policy victories?
Yeah, so I'll jump in here. I mentioned earlier the structural barriers within the WIOA program that are inhibiting access for justice-involved young people to access workforce development programming. So we at COIN have been working with the State Workforce Board for the past, I would say, a year and a half on a statewide waiver to give workforce boards a little more flexibility in how they use those federal dollars. The waiver was actually approved by the federal government in early August. And it will allow workforce boards to reduce down to 50% the set aside that they have to use for out of school youth, meaning they can use up to 50% of their resources for in-school youth. We also made that contingent on them using that additional flexibility specifically for systems involved youth. So not only justice youth, but also foster youth and youth experiencing homelessness. The idea was modeled after a waiver that was piloted in Los Angeles County a couple of years ago. And they tripled the number of justice-involved youth that were accessing WIOA-funded programs and services in just 2 years. In program year 2016, only 56 youth were in the justice system were accessing WIOA-funded programs and services in the LA City Workforce Board. 2 years later, 150 were. And so that's the kind of impact we're trying to replicate statewide, making sure that these young people do have access to these training opportunities, making sure that those structural barriers are not in the way and that the workforce boards have the flexibility to serve them. It was kind of a shotgun implementation of the waiver because it was approved by the feds in August and it was kind of mid-program year. And so in early September, the State Workforce Board put out its guidance to the local workforce boards and said, if you want to leverage this flexibility, let us know by the end of the month. Fortunately, 17 workforce boards did opt in the current program year, despite the fact that they have to amend contracts and work with their providers to kind of change the parameters of those contracts. But I thought that was great participation in the waiver. It shows that there's a recognition around the state that workforce boards do want to serve these young people and do need more flexibility in doing so. And then as we look forward, I expect there to be an even larger cohort of workforce boards that opt in next summer when they can build this into the beginning of their program year. So the next opportunity for those workforce boards is July 1st of 2022. We expect the vast majority of workforce boards to be in the waiver at that point. And then again, what we're hoping is that replication of what they piloted down in LA, a tripling of the number of justice-involved youth who are able to access these training programs across the state.
Thank you, Sean. When we look at policy, recent policy victories, sometimes we may look at or focus only on state policies. And I've already mentioned AB 2147, the Firefighters expungement bill, and the Senate Bill 866, multi-craft core curriculum bill, both are state policies. On a local level, there's also a huge impact. Right now, as we are preparing for the closure of DJJ facilities, each county will be responsible for the programming that's provided for youth. And this is this county by county, we have a board of supervisors, and we've been working closely with our board of supervisors, probation halls and camps, and other partners. So for instance, probation and making sure that credible messengers are available to mentor and guide youth that are currently incarcerated in LA County, but with partnerships such as Best Buy, we'll be opening up the first ever teen tech center within the secure track facility. And we're hoping that this will be a model that will be copied by other counties. The other things that we're working on have been implemented in some of the juvenile halls is actually college programs. We now have over a dozen young people that have graduated with their associate's degrees, either from Mission or UCLA. And now we're looking to actually increase that to bachelor's and master's level, as some of these young people end up doing more than a couple of years, may end up doing 6 to 7 years in the juvenile facilities. With the commitment from different colleges, it's amazing. We've had 3 of these young people come home. I always get ready to call them kids because they're young enough to be my children. 3 of these young people that have come home that graduated with their associate's degrees. One is in Sacramento and he's enrolled in Sacramento State. 2 are here down in Los Angeles. One came home a week ago. He's already in a dorm in Cal Poly. And the last is trying to finish up probation so he could actually go to San Francisco University. All enrolled, all accepted, but this started on a juvenile level with simple policy shifts to our board of supervisors. And so these are huge changes that are within our system that oftentimes we may not see, but are vitally important, because what happens is we're able to shrink the system and eventually maybe one day have a system that has very little, if no, corrections need. I'm hopeful for that, but first we have to end poverty.
Absolutely. If I could just chime in, I don't have much to add based on the policy of what these gentlemen have talked about, but I do want to talk a little bit about some of the policy victories that we had this year. We co-sponsored with Policy Link and the California Immigrant Policy Center and California Workforce Association AB 628 this year, which was an extension of AB 1111, and really opened up a clearer pathway for community-based organizations like all of ours to be able to access workforce dollars to serve and create programs for underserved populations, specifically formerly incarcerated people, immigrants, et cetera, and so forth. That budget request and that bill was able to get $30 million this year in this year's budget. So we're excited about that. So all the CBOs out there that are listening, there are workforce dollars available for you to create and innovate in a meaningful way for the population that you serve. I already spoke a little bit about the historic award that we got. It's important to just renote it for a couple of reasons. I'm just very proud of the state of California and the governor specifically himself for buying into the notion of proximity and how important it is for directly impacted people across sectors to be not only having a voice in the solutions for the problems they face, but also to be leading in that charge. I'm also very proud that they understood that what was needed is human-centered and holistic solutions. In addition to that, really understanding that people coming out of prison are more than just what they can do physically, and that we also have intellectual capacity to contribute to the California economy and to the national economy. And so to start thinking about formerly incarcerated people or justice involved people and what value proposition they bring as far as their thought capital is extremely important for the state to invest in this year, because it's an acknowledgement that we're more than just putting on an orange vest and working for Caltrans or doing some other type of physical labor. And it's demonstrated by the wonderful leaders, some of which are on this call, Sam, and many others across the state who have been a force in changing policy in this state and leading in many different sectors in this state. And so I'm just really proud of the state of California for that effort and for that vote of faith.
Awesome. So many victories this legislative session, and we're hoping that next year is similar and we get more wins for the populations that we care about. All righty, and I think we have one last question, which is any final thoughts? Any other comments, insight you'd like to provide for our audience today?
I would just add on the policy how important it is for organizations that are listening on the call and organizations that are even on the call participating as panelists. It's important, especially when it comes to policy, that we collaborate and consolidate power in order to move change in the legislature. We're at a unique moment in history, and there's a tremendous amount of opportunity if we centralize the power that we have. The power really is in the people. I know that's a cliche, but the truth of the matter is that if we can rise above, geographics or organizational priorities and really band together to talk to legislators and push policy, I think that we can move the world with the current makeup of the California legislature. So I would just invite everybody to think about partnerships, think about consolidating and reaching out to people who are aligned with what you're doing, and let's go up there and make stuff happen.
Thank you, Ken. I'll add to that. We talked a little bit about employer education. I think the key that we found when it comes to employer education, we actually have 2 more things that we're about to roll out in terms of career sectors that are pretty big. I've been sworn to secrecy on this until it happens because there are contracts that are involved. But we use employers like NBC Universal, Marvel, Warner to come to the table with others that would not normally have pathways for people that have been incarcerated. And when they hear of these huge organizations employing formerly incarcerated people and telling them what great people we are, it has opened doors to places that, like, if you think about it, the Firefighters program, if you really know firefighting, it's a super conservative community that's close knit. But they were willing to give this a chance. And what they found was that they are some really great human beings that just need an opportunity, that may have made bad choices somewhere along the line. And so I think when we want to educate or prepare employers that may not offer those opportunities, bring our employers. And when I say our, I mean everybody that has employers that actually hire people that have been incarcerated one time or another to the table to share that. Oftentimes, what I've heard over and over again is you'll find that you have the most loyal and hardest working group of people that you can find if you give them the opportunity.
Definitely. Rebecca, Sean, any other comments, insights?
No, the only other thing that I'd say is I think there's an emerging opportunity in the state's expansion of the high road training partnerships. And this sort of links back to the question of livable wages. The state has really begun investing in this model that's been piloted around the state. It's a combination, our partnership between labor and industry and the workforce system. And it's shown a lot of promise in delivering good, high quality, livable jobs to people who go through those programs. But I think we need to hold the state accountable to making sure those programs are accessible to this population, to make sure that the things that were discussed earlier, wraparound mental health services, record expungement, are built into these program models as they start replicating the model around the state, to make sure that, the equity focus of the program is actually achieved. So I think that's something we need to hold the state accountable for as they roll out this program.
Definitely. And just, I know we have 15 minutes left, and there were a couple questions in the chat box that maybe we have time to get to super quick. But I also wanted to give, before we get to the questions, a super quick shout out to AB 417, not to put you on the spot, Rebecca, AB 417, the Rising Scholars Network, that got funding in the budget that was led by Assemblymember Riccardi, which will provide funding for justice involved students attending community colleges and really expand that program. So that was a huge victory. And also shout out to COIN on that waiver that we owe. Waiver took almost 2 years and we're here. And, thank you, Sean and COIN and all the partners that supported it. And also shout out to, I'm giving shout outs to everybody, CROP on AB 628 and the funding that we got in the budget as well, and our partners. And another point that Sam made as well is really leveraging local, state, and federal support to really bolster these programs that will support the populations that we're talking about today. So lots of work to do next year. We're already brainstorming so many ideas for next year. And let me pull up the chat box super quick here. So there was one question on WIOA that I saw from Robin Graham. Any particular practices suggested that a WIOA program should have in various areas from recruitment to case management and retention? Anybody want to take a stab at that one? I feel like WIOA is like a whole other beast that folks are still grappling with.
I mean, it's all of that. You know, for youth and young adults, there are significant barriers, some of which can be addressed through 628. It's an allowable use of the Breaking Barriers to Employment initiative, but there are often resource needs that young people have to access programs. They may have childcare that they need assistance with. They may need support in acquiring the necessary equipment to participate in a training program. They may need transportation access and resources. So we've been kind of talking the last couple of years about how there's this upfront resource gap that workforce boards should be, suited to accommodate, but they often aren't. I do think 628 is going to help a lot with that, but it needs to be built into the model to make these programs truly accessible, I think, to justice involved, at least youth and young adults.
Definitely. And I did link AB 628 in the chat box and the language if folks want to take a look at that. That's the funding that Ken mentioned earlier and Sean as well. All righty. Any other questions? I'm just skimming through the chat box here. Another question that was WIOA centered is, what prep work do you suggest happens prior to this population entering into the very restrictive structure of WIOA?
I'll take that one again. And again, sorry, this is the youth and young adults lens, but a lot of the time it's soft skill development. And it's a fundable use of WIOA dollars. But I think the restrictive piece is well recognized, because once you're in the program, WIOA, the performance metrics are all about get them into a job as fast as possible. And that's how your success is measured. I think there needs to be broader accommodation for meeting youth where they are sometimes, and getting them ready to engage in a significant training program. And a lot of that sometimes requires some of that soft skill development on the front end. So I think the workforce system needs to be structured to accommodate that.
Definitely. Rebecca, I saw you inserted, is that a report I see in the chat box?
It is. It's something that I pull out sometimes and I like to pass on to people. It's the Society of Human Resource Managers, which is a national HR organization, very well respected in the field. And they did a big survey of their folks in 2018. And it didn't get a ton of play, but I have found it very helpful in just sort of pointing out, like, look, folks with records are good employees, employers like them. Like there's positive here, not because I think sometimes people distrust the advocacy side, or they sort of look at the advocacy side with like, well, but this is not an advocacy. This is human resource folks, like folks with records. They want them. They're, and combined with advocacy, I've found it sort of a helpful document. So I send it out because I think sometimes it can be good building an argument for why this is so critically important and not a risk.
Yep. Definitely agree. And a comment you made earlier, Rebecca, about employers being at the table, so important to make a workforce work, right? Because they're the ones that are hiring and making sure that, their employees have quality benefits and access to that. So definitely important. All righty, I don't see any other questions in the chat box. And if panelists don't have any other last minute comments, insights, all righty, then I'll turn it over to Zima.
Thank you, Anna. And that was really informative. I was taking notes feverishly over here, and there's a couple of themes that emerged, as we went through our discussion. Here are just a few that really stuck out for me. Is high road jobs, not just any job. We don't want some job that isn't going to sustain a family, sustain an individual, doesn't come with benefits, doesn't come with dependable scheduling. So you're getting 5 hours one week and 40 hours the next week. So not just any job. Honoring lived experience. The folks that are going through it and have lived it are the experts, and hands down 100%. And of course, it takes a lot of villages A lot of systems, a lot of supports, to help all of us get where we want to be, but we need to center the individual and honor them for their lived experience. Services, housing, food, transportation, health, mental health. I come from mental health. That's my origin story, is in the mental health space. 1 in 5 people will have a mental health challenge in their lifetime. And this is something we can't ignore. So mental health care, so folks are provided with the services and supports that they need, so their person, their whole self, can arrive and meet their goals, their education, training, and workforce goals. CBE, CPL, so competency-based education, credit for prior learning. I did add a link to a report that EDGE released earlier this year, wanting to create more enabling conditions so competency-based education and credit for prior learning can be implemented more widely in California, starting with the job. We can do education and training all day long. If there's not a job for someone to land into, none of it matters. So ensuring that there's that through line that gets folks into those high quality jobs. Stigma came up multiple times in this conversation. There shouldn't be a lifetime punishment. There shouldn't be a lifelong scarlet letter on someone's back, preventing them from achieving their goals. And access, removing barriers, raising awareness of what exists. Again, we can have wonderful programming all day long, but if nobody knows about it and they really truly cannot access it, then it doesn't matter and it won't work. So, and just so great to hear about all the wonderful programming and efforts all of our panelists shared today. There's a lot of great folks at the table doing this hard work for the people, and it really means a whole lot. So I just want to thank everybody. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, moderator, for a wonderful discussion. Attendees, thank you for joining us today. We will follow up via email with everyone that registered will receive the recording link and some information on how to keep in touch with the panelist organizations, as well as Skills for California Network, EDGE, and the National Skills Coalition. If you have any questions that weren't covered during this session today, feel free to email us at info@caedge.org. I'll put that in the chat once more. We're happy to route your questions to the appropriate panelists so you can have your questions answered. We would love to partner with you in the coming legislative session and beyond. And I think that will wrap our session for today. Again, thank you so much and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Bye.